Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me. Well, I've been away for a while. The holiday season is here, and so I've been busy doing a lot of different things, stuff with the family, stuff at work, stuff at school, but I'm back. And because it's the holiday season, I think it's the right time to talk about one thing that we like to talk about all the time, but that we don't really think about when we talk about it, and that's food. We love eating. I don't know about you. I look forward to the holiday season where I can eat all kinds of food, as much of it as I can, and see how much of that food will last throughout the week so I can just keep eating it and eating it and eating it. So we just had Thanksgiving. I'm still eating Thanksgiving food right now. I know it's been a week later. I think it's still good and I'm eating it. Christmas is coming up, all these Christmas parties. Where I work here at the university, we have lots of potlucks, lots of gatherings, and we're going to be doing a lot of eating. So much eating. And so on this episode, I want to talk about food, but more specifically, I want to talk about food justice. You may have heard it referred to as food insecurity. We'll talk about why that's not the term I want to use. But we're going to talk about food justice, the idea that there are people who do not have access to food that would be healthy for them simply because of who they are and where they live. That's the only reason. They can afford it, they have the means, but there's no access because of where they are. We're going to talk about that on this episode of the podcast. Stay tuned. This is the Environmental Justice Lab. Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I'm Dr. Joseph. Thank you so much for listening. So on this episode today, we're talking about food insecurity, food justice. And before we even start talking about the specifics, let me just get the terms on the table. Because when you think about what the government would report, at least in the United States, they talk about food insecurity. And what they'll tell you is that it's a major issue, that it affects millions of people across the country. So in their last survey, the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, found that 12.8% of all Americans here in the United States are food insecure. And what they meant by that was that these millions of people live in conditions where access to adequate food is limited. That's the definition. Not just that you go hungry, but that you have little or no access to adequate, healthy food to eat on a regular basis. You are insecure in that reality. So if you need food, you're not quite sure if you're going to be able to get the kind of food you need to sustain yourself and your family. And so that's the way the USDA kind of talks about this idea of food insecurity. And so you see the government have different programs to try to combat food insecurity. They do things like the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, where they allow low-income families to get subsidies in order to purchase food that they would need to try to help them combat this idea of having food insecurity. And you might get, TANF. TANF is another program, temporary assistance for needy families. The idea is that you're in need. Here is some money, some resources. Go and get what you need to sustain you and your family. Now, I am a big supporter of those programs. Those programs help lift up families out of poverty. It helps keep people fed and sustained. And it's the kind of program that should be expanded to include more families and more individuals who don't have the resources that they need to get the food that is required to continue to sustain themselves on a day-to-day basis. But here's the thing. we have to go far beyond the idea of simply talking about food insecurity. Because what happens is when you talk about insecurity, you give the impression that simply writing a check and simply providing some additional funding will help alleviate that insecurity. What it doesn't do is confront the reality that a lot of families, a lot of neighborhoods and communities don't need additional resources and money. What they need are actual stores and actual locations they can go to that have the kinds of food that they would need to eat to be healthy, to have nutritious diets, and to continue to live a healthy, prosperous life. And that's when we talk about food justice. That's the term that I think is more appropriate when we talk about food in general, because we're not just simply talking about not having access, right? You might hear food insecurity. Somebody might say we live in a food desert. You know, the idea that we don't have a grocery store near us. Like, that's the problem. Living in a food desert, not having food justice. So let's talk about some of these terms that I think will help us think about food in a better way and allow us to think more clearly about what the problems are when it comes to this idea of having access to food. So we talked about food insecurity just now. The definition, I'm getting these definitions from the Boston University's Community Resource Center website. Very great website. There'll be a link in the description. It's very good information. They define food security as having access at all time to enough food for an active and healthy life. Makes sense? The opposite of that would be food insecurity, which is not having access to the food you need for a healthy and active life. That's fine. There can be lots of reasons why you are not food secure. We need to talk about those. Another definition, food desert. A food desert is an area where most of the community lives at least 1 or more miles from the nearest supermarket. So now we're talking about living in an area, usually an urban area. I think the definition for the urban area is 1 mile. Definition for rural area is 10 miles. And there's no supermarket near you. So even if you had the money, you have the resources, where are you going to buy the food? You live in a literal desert because there's nothing near you. Now, researchers have all shown us that these food deserts disproportionately affect people of color. Black, brown communities, indigenous communities are the places where, in most instances, these food deserts are located. That's where they're found. And the Union of Concerned Scientists, they take it a step further and they talk about food apartheid, which is a term that they prefer to use because what they say is that it highlights the reality that food insecurity is not a coincidence. It's not by chance that these are food deserts. These are by design, by the plan and the structure of how a city is put together. Certain areas will have all the supermarkets and all of the farmers markets and all of the places where you can get good, healthy food. And some places will not, and there'll be deserts. And the people who live in those different areas are very different. Wealthier, wider communities have more supermarkets, more fresh foods available. Poorer and darker skinned communities won't. By design, they call it food apartheid. And so to bring it all together, what we're calling for is food justice. The idea that you rectify these realities in such a way that we all have access to the food that we need to live healthy and active lives. That we're able to do what's necessary to feed our families good food and not whatever's available. That's the way that we want to think about this idea of food. Food justice, food apartheid. We need to be very clear about why things are the way they are. Not just that they are, but why is that? Why is it that when you go through a Black community, you don't see a supermarket, but you see a dollar store, a Dollar General, a Family Dollar, a Dollar Tree, lots of liquor stores, lots of places where you can't get the food that you actually need, but all these other places that serve unhealthy junk food that you now have to purchase to feed your family because you live in what we're calling a food desert. That's the issue. And I've seen it. I've seen the differences in these communities. So I grew up, back then there was a small town called Rock Hill, South Carolina, and we lived just outside city limits. And our school district was about 1.5 miles from our house. And right across the street from the high school there was a nice big Food Lion. We would always go shopping there. It was very quick, very easy to go get the food we needed. Whatever we required, we got it from there. It was no problem. But then the Food Lion shut down. I don't know why it shut down, but it wasn't there anymore. And so when that happened, we had to drive 10, 15, 20 minutes to try to get to a Walmart. They opened up a Hannaford grocery store further in town. There was a Bilo, a Winn-Dixie, about 15 minutes away that also shut down. And it was really difficult to get good food quickly because now we lived in what we now know is called a food desert. And I wish I knew more then about why these stores would shut down. But all I can tell you is that once they did, we found it very difficult to get what we needed. And then we fast forward. I'm living in Colombia. I'm married. We're about to have children. And we're looking for places to raise a family. And so we first live in West Columbia, very nice community. There's a Bilo right around the corner. There's, a Food Lion a little bit further down. We had our preferences about what kind of food stores we want to go to. And of course, they had your Dollar Trees and Dollar Generals all around. And so it was a fairly healthy food environment, right? So a food environment would be the way you would describe the stores and the supermarkets that sold food in your surrounding area. That's your food environment. It's very important to live in a good food environment with good diversity and lots of options. And I was in West Columbia, and we were fine with that. The issue was the school district wasn't so great. And so then we moved out beyond the city of Columbia to Lexington, which is a smaller town on the outside of the Columbia metro area. So Columbia is the capital of South Carolina. We're moving further and further away from the city center to a suburb, a very nice suburb, I have to say. We have this nice fancy house at the end of a cul-de-sac. Is an amazing place to live. But now guess what? Our food environment completely changed. So now instead of having a Walmart and a Food Lion and a Bilo kind of in our vicinity, we have literally 2 Publix supermarkets very close to where we live. And if you're not aware of Publix is more the high-end supermarkets. One of the stores that really goes above and beyond to get all the food that you need. There wasn't one in West Columbia. There wasn't one in Rock Hill, South Carolina. But there's one here in Lexington. There's 2 of them. And a Food Lion and a Bilo and all these other stores. So many options to choose from. All in this one small town that's very wealthy, very well off. And you can see right away that just living in that area gives you so many more options and so many more opportunities to get the food that you need just by virtue of where you live and the people that live there. And so that's the thing that we're talking about. It shouldn't be that your location determines your access to good, healthy food, because we all need food to sustain ourselves. We shouldn't have to live in an area devoid of good food options. We shouldn't have to do that. And that's just us as a family. Now imagine for 1 second if, for instance, you're a college student, right? So we know from research that college students suffer from higher levels of food insecurity than the average population. Why? You live on a campus. That campus is in a very particular location, and that campus usually doesn't have a healthy food environment outside of it. And you don't have access to healthy things on campus. You usually have fast food restaurants, maybe a cafeteria, but it's difficult to get healthy food. And then if you actually had access to it, could you prepare it and store it in your dorm room? It depends on what kind of dorm room you have. If you have a dorm room with a full kitchen and the refrigerator and freezer and all that stuff, you'd be better off versus a typical dorm room, which is just a couple of beds. And if you're very, very lucky, a mini fridge that somebody bought you that you can plug into the wall under your bed to keep some drinks, maybe, and something small for a snack. But that's the issue. So food insecurity heightens when you go off to college. If you happen to work or live in a very working class, very blue collar neighborhood, you don't see that many grocery stores, that many supermarkets. You don't. You see the fast food restaurants, you see the convenience stores, you see a lot of dollar stores, all those things. It becomes a big problem. And so when we talk about food, we talk about food justice. We're talking about a movement where we want to ensure that all of us, no matter who we are or where we are, have the food that we need. Another term that's used often is food sovereignty. I like that word a lot, actually. So food sovereignty, as it's defined here, is the right of people, especially farmers, to define their own food systems. Food sovereignty demands that the policies and mechanisms involved in production, distribution, and consumption of food focus on creating ecologically sustainable systems and healthy lives for people rather than profits for corporations. So now you put the power, you put the decision-making abilities into the hands of the people who live in those communities, and you allow them to dictate their food environment, what's around them. It doesn't get to be a situation where the corporation comes to city council and says, that looks like a profitable neighborhood, we'll go over there and not over there. No, what happens is the people say, this is what we want, this is what we don't want. And I've lived in neighborhoods where they'll tell you, I don't want that Walmart here. I want this kind of supermarket here. I don't want that store here. No dollar stores, no Dollar Generals. I want only these kind of stores in our neighborhood. Some people have that ability and that sovereignty over their food environment. We want everybody to have that. We want everyone to be able to say, this is what we have here, and this is what we want to see when we leave our homes. This is the kind of food we want to have access to. This is what we want. This is what we demand because it's our right. It shouldn't be a privilege to have a supermarket where you live. It shouldn't be a privilege to be able to go and buy fresh fruit and vegetables from a store. It should be a right that everyone is afforded by virtue of being human and by virtue of being someone who lives in a community. That's the way it should go. We have to remember that, because if we just talk about, surface level food insecurity or food access or unhealthy eating, what tends to happen is that you start pointing the finger at the victims, the people, and you say, you need to make better choices. Here's some additional money so you can go and get what you need to eat so you can be healthy. It becomes about them. And the idea is that they're the reasons why they're unhealthy and not where they should be. When in reality, it's the system around them. It's the city planning. It's the political decisions that are made that dictate what their options actually are and what's available to them. And so the only way to combat that is to demand food justice. And there are so many stories, so many studies, so many researchers that have looked into the reality that Black, Native American, Latinx people in the United States are far less likely to live near a store that sells fresh, healthy food. So what do they end up doing? You buy what's available. You get the potato chips. You get the canned food. You get the pre-packaged, freeze-dried, frozen foods. And you shop at the dollar stores and you eat at the fast food restaurants and you're just being unhealthy. And so now you see health impacts from this lack of food access. So now you see higher rates of diabetes. You see higher rates of heart disease. You see higher rates of all kinds of illnesses because people have unhealthy diets. And it's not because they chose those diets. It's because that's all that was available to them when they went to go get some food for their families. That's the problem. That's the problem. The Union of Concerned Scientists did a study in 2016, and they found that increasing the number of fresh food sources in communities of color significantly lowered diabetes rates among those populations. Because it's true that having healthy, fresh food makes you a healthier person. And it's also true that if they have access and a choice, people are going to choose the healthy food over the unhealthy food. That's just a reality. We might not hear it said that way very often. It may be that people believe that these communities are making bad choices. It's their fault that they're in these situations. They need to eat healthier. They need to do more to prevent themselves from having these persistent health issues. It's not true. It's not true. The truth is, there's no access. I can't go down to the store and buy lettuce or a tomato, but I can go and get potato chips and get tomato paste out of a can and try to make something out of it and feed my family with it. That's the problem. And that's the issue when it comes to food justice. We have to be aware of the fact that without access, you're relegating these communities to unhealthy lifestyles, unhealthy eating habits, which will then lead to continued health problems. And it'll pass it down from parents to child to child to grandchild because they don't see any other way to feed themselves. They don't see any other type of food they should be consuming because it's not available to them. That's the problem. And you shouldn't have to move out to the suburbs. You shouldn't have to relocate your family to put yourself in a place where you can get fresh, healthy food. It should be made available everywhere we go. So I'll tell you another story. So, like I said, we live in Lexington. It's a small town outside the capital city of Columbia. But we go to church at a church that's located in the northeastern part of the capital city in Columbia. And so what's interesting is to just watch the environment change as we drive from our fancy suburb into the city, through the city, to the northeast to go to church. Right? So I'll pass grocery store, farmer's market, all these high-end kind of vegan option type stores and coffee shops. And oh, it looks so nice. You get on the interstate, you go up, you're into the city, you're downtown, fancy restaurants, another couple of stores, supermarkets are here. You keep going through downtown toward the northeast. You're on Main Street. You go up North Main Street. So Main Street just starts changing. All of a sudden, I don't see any more grocery stores. I see more fast food places, Burger Kings. There's a Family Dollar, a Dollar Tree, a Dollar General. And then I keep going. I turn on the street near where our church is. Now I don't see anything. I see a police station. I see gas station, tire shop, construction company, $1 General on that entire street. $1 General. And I'm telling you, this Dollar General, you wouldn't even want to go into it. It has the big accordion doors on the front, like a big cage. It has all these security measures. You would think that it's the most dangerous place to be in, the way it's set up and the way it's structured. And so we always drive right past it to go to church, and then we go into our church. Where are the people who go to church here getting their food from? They're not getting it anywhere near here. I hope they have vehicles. I hope they have a friend that can take them on a trip to go find a grocery store to get some food, because it's not available. And that's the problem. It shouldn't be all of that just to get some food. And then you want to look at them and you say, oh, diabetes is high in this community. Blood pressure is high in this community. Obesity is high in this community. Well, of course it is. They don't have anything to eat. There's no place to go to get food that's actually healthy. They're doing the best that they can. You can't look at them, and then somehow say that they're the reason that they're in an unhealthy state. It's just not true. The truth is that part of town has been relegated to having only one minuscule unhealthy food option, which is that $1 General. That's the real issue. Not one grocery store. There's no farmer's market coming to town. Every so often there's a food drive where big trucks come. They give away potatoes. They give away boxes of food. Our church does a lot of outreach where we give away, literally millions of tons of food, because there is none in that area. And it's not enough. It's not good enough to just say, well, wait for the next food drop if you want something healthy to eat. It's not going to work. The truth is, we need food justice. We need people actively fighting for healthy food options in these neighborhoods. And don't tell me that they're not going to go to the store. They're not going to buy the food. They can't afford it. They absolutely can. And we all know that these grocery stores, because they're on a larger scale, the food is actually less expensive there than at a dollar store. That's the tricky part. You might see $1 for $3, $4 for a gallon of milk. It's cheaper in a grocery store. It's much cheaper. The food that these dollar stores sell are more expensive. They just sell smaller amounts of it and charge you $1 for it. You're getting less for your money. So if you had an actual grocery store, they would all benefit, and they would all be flooding that store to get the food that they know is healthier and better for them. But it's just not there. It's not available. We need to make this food available. The last thing I'll say about this, because I can go on and on. I don't know if you remember, but I think a few months ago, maybe earlier this year, there was a shooting in Buffalo, New York, at a supermarket. It was clearly a hate crime. The shooter came in from out of town, targeted this black neighborhood, knew that this black neighborhood had this one supermarket where all the black people went to, and so he went in and shot and killed so many people. And so they shut down that supermarket in Buffalo, New York, in that black neighborhood where everybody would go shopping. And what we learned was once they shut down that store, there was no other place for those residents to go to get healthy food. It created a food desert because there was only one store in that neighborhood that had the food that they could buy that would keep them healthy. Where I live, there's multiple supermarkets with the same name in our little town. So many of them. You go to this black neighborhood in Buffalo, you go to the Northeast where our church is, you go to different parts of any city, look for the higher percentage of black residents, look for the indigenous populations, and you'll find food deserts. And you'll find places where you can't get the food you need, where you can't get fresh vegetables to make a salad. You can't find fruit. You can't find any of these things because those populations are located in places where the cities have determined that there will be no access to these healthy foods. No access at all. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about food justice. So as you enjoy the holidays, I want you to really enjoy the food that you're eating. If you have family coming over, you have friends, if you're cooking, if you're catering, whatever you're doing, I want you to enjoy yourself. Eat that food. Season it and enjoy it and love it and enjoy the company around you. And just know that you're getting to enjoy something that many people around the world don't get to enjoy because they live in areas where the food is not available. So enjoy that food. After you eat that food, I'm eating. I need you to bring all that to the table because I'm eating it. But afterwards, we need to reinvigorate our commitment to advancing food justice wherever we can, however we can. Whatever you can do, I need you to do it. This is what I'm doing. So I don't know if you know this, but I'm a professor at the University of South Carolina. I'm also a part-time professor at Benedict College. Benedict College is an historically black college down the street from the University of South Carolina in Columbia. And so I was able to win a grant from the United Negro College Fund, sponsored by Kroger. Kroger is another food supermarket chain, to examine food access and food environments around historically black colleges in South Carolina. I'm going to start that project in January. I'll let you know how it goes, but I really want to dig into the reality that certain communities, certain populations do not have access. And so I'll be doing research to that end, hopefully presenting and publishing the results and trying to get the word out and trying to think through different interventions to confront this reality, to confront the fact that in South Carolina, at least, and I know in many other places, our historically black colleges are located in food deserts. They just are. And so what can we do about that? That's what I'm going to try to do. I know everybody's not a researcher. Everybody's not a professor. So whatever you can do, if you need to sign a petition, if you want to speak out at a council meeting, if you want to support your local food pantry, your local food bank, or you want to start one, do whatever you can to raise the issue of food justice and food insecurity and food apartheid, because it's a real thing. It's affecting millions and millions of people in the United States and billions around the world. And we can all do something to help, something to push this forward. That's my call to you as a listener. And that is our episode of the Environmental Justice Lab podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Here we are for the people and for the planet. See you next time.